31st of the 3rd, 2-4. Happy Easter to all of you out there celebrating. And in today's F1 news, Lewis Hamilton has revealed that they've lost 90 points of downforce as versus their 22 car. Oof. And the timing of this news, of course, couldn't be better, coming on the back of a double DNF at Australia. Hamilton puts it thus that Mercedes simply had no other option, that in order to solve the bouncing and porpoising, this is what they had to do. Porpoising, of course, being a phenomenal experience by the cars on the back of new rules and regulations. Lest we forget that in this era, to optimise for downforce, you need to run these cars low, but then that gives rise to other issues, gremlins like bouncing, porpoising. The solve, raise the ride height, but in doing so, lose downforce. Ergo, Lewis asserts, every time we take one step forward, we take 3 steps back. Oof. And this rings true now more than ever, as Mercedes have had their worst start to an F1 season since 2012. Oh, the humanity. And in scrapping their zero pod concept, the outfit from Brackley and Brixworth figured that they'd solved for this issue, only for it to reoccur via bouncing in 2-4. When asked if he'd experienced the problem so difficult to get on top of, Lewis Hamilton responded the only occasion was McLaren in 2009. But critically, Hamilton says the difference between then and now is that McLaren knew the root cause. Indeed, in absolute terms, their downforce targets were too low. They'd been too conservative. In stark contrast in 2-4, Mercedes have no clue. Theirs is a bucket with too many holes in it. For the avoidance of doubt, there are correlation issues, peak your performance yet and still, key personnel leaving. Where do you start? And if you needed proof of the extent of Mercedes' woes, you only need look at the times. Because in 2-3 at Australia, the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth were 2/10 shy of the pace. Less than 1 year later, 2/10 becomes 8. That's bonkers. And the irony is not lost on us then that Mercedes social media chooses to do a nostalgic celebration. Because on this day in 2009, the outfit formerly known as Brawn GP celebrated an epic 1-2 courtesy of Messrs Barrichello and Button. But that was then and this is now, a thought seconded by sponsors Puma, who hitherto have been responsible for all Mercedes apparel, all except for mechanics wares. For that, Tommy Hilfiger have been responsible. Both of the aforementioned, however, will be parting ways with Mercedes, with the German clothing manufacturer Adidas said to supersede them. Adidas, having brokered a sponsorship deal said to be worth up to £6 million. It's a lot of money. And of course, one of the drivers in this deal is Lewis Hamilton, since he has close working relationships with both Tommy and Puma. And if those brands can maintain access to the man from Stevenage's social media presence in terms of exposure and visibility, who needs Mercedes? Makes sense. And in other F1 news, former F1 boss and ex-Queen's Park Rangers owner Juan Flavio Briatore has undergone successful heart surgery to remove a benign tumour. Earlier this week, the ex-Benetton man was discharged from a Milan hospital. The former Benetton man announced on Instagram that the surgery had been pretty successful. Forza Flavio. And in other F1 news, Haas team boss Io Komatsu has come out and praised the team's successful start, saying, however, that looking ahead, we've still got a lot of work to do. Komatsu says of the car that our development direction is clear. We'd planned to bring updates to the car later on in the season, but thanks to the hard work of the aerodynamics team, those will be brought earlier. And whilst many F1 fans still miss the former Haas team boss, one Gunther Steiner, but the general consensus in the paddock is that the rational-minded, stoic, technical-based approach that Io Komatsu has brought to the team has been much needed, long overdue. Hashtag free Gunther Steiner. And in other news, David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan of the aptly named FFS podcast have chimed in, being openly critical of Lewis Hamilton's comments recently. You remember that on the back of the investigation into the current president of the FIA, Lewis Hamilton said that what Formula One needs right now is more transparency, honesty, and accountability. Coulthard, ex-Red Bull and Williams driver, responded thus, quote, I'm always a bit curious on that actually, because it's like people asking for things where they're not having to actually do it. DC continues, lead by example in being transparent and open, rather than just doing so whenever there's a controversy. I can't help but wonder what DC was implying here. I mean, with all the rigmarole around Hornergate scandal, pending employment tribunal, you'd never know that DC were a Red Bull man, would you? Because for my money, to even insinuate that the man from Stevenage isn't leading by example is a gross mischaracterisation. Indeed, of the 20 drivers currently on the grid, Lewis might be the only one that you could accuse of leading by example on all things transparency, openness and honesty. Genuine question then for one David Coulthard. What are you talking about? And in other news, driver silly season is the gift that keeps giving, with one Danny Rick's position at RB Visa Cash App still in full focus. With Messrs Lawson, Porsche, Drogovic, Antonelli, Bearman all waiting in the wings, the timing of Danny Rick's underperformance couldn't have been worse. And if Danny Rick's dream is to one day drive for Red Bull, Checo Perez's performance thus far this season hasn't helped. Shy of a race victory, the Mexican Minister of Defence has ticked all the boxes, all but ending Danny Rick's Cinderella dreams. Lest we forget that for that second Red Bull seat, that one Carlos Sainz Jr. has also thrown his hat into the arena after a sterling performance at the Australian Grand Prix. Danny Rick then, he'll have to get in line. Although the Honey Badger's biggest supporter internally, Christian Horner, has come out in defence of the Australian's performances hitherto. Horner says, I think it's still very early in the year to be thinking about next year. Danny Rick's a big boy and he'll definitely pick himself up, but sometimes being an F1 driver is quite lonely. So a bit of encouragement's never a bad thing. And all this tumult around Danny Rick makes you view his tenure at McLaren through a different lens now. At the time, F1 insiders agreed that his poor performance was wholly attributable to the car, that it was anomalous. On recent form though, this is becoming the new normal for Danny Rick, a pattern of behaviour even. And to compound the issue, on the back of sterling performance thus far this season, his teammate Yuki Tsunoda is front and centre when it comes to the Red Bull second seat. The race reports that when asked about the second seat at Red Bull, Tsunoda said that hopefully they'll consider it. Yuki continues, at the same time, I do everything I can to show the performance that I have even to other teams. I just want to increase my value as a driver and prove that I can fight. I don't know what's going on with Red Bull, but hopefully they'll consider it. And in other silly season news, Eddie Jordan has chimed in on Carlos Sainz's next destination. He thinks the Spaniard is a shoo-in, not for Mercedes or Red Bull, but for Aston Martin. Jordan speculates that should Alonso choose to retire or move to Mercedes, that Carlos would be the perfect replacement. But even if Alonso doesn't retire, Lawrence at this point has to be aware that Sainz Jr. represents a material upgrade as versus Lance. The pertinent question here though is, could Lawrence do it? Ugh, the humanity. And silly season, well, this is March Madness at this point, as four-time champion Sebastian Vettel is rumoured to have been having conversations with Toto Wolff, yes, about replacing Lewis Hamilton. Oof. In an interview with German Sky Sports, Vettel said of his discussions with Toto Wolff that they haven't discussed it concretely yet. The German continued that he's still in touch with the people who have influenced his career. Vettel says that he spoke on the phone with Toto, not specifically about Lewis Hamilton's seat, but more about Mercedes. But on a potential comeback, Vettel confessed to having flirted with it, having given the idea some serious thought. Vettel said that I have plans for F1, but I don't know when or what those will look like. This on the back of Sebastian Vettel's recent test of the Porsche 963 with a view to potentially enter Le Mans 24 Hour. And to that proposition, Sebastian said, I don't know what will come of that just yet. I have to feel about it, and that takes time. Now, no, Sebastian didn't leave the sport in a blaze of glory, but that being said, he is now and will always be a four-time champion. Now, were he to come back in a Mercedes in the stead of Lewis Hamilton, moves don't get more blockbuster. Ergo, count me in. No further questions, Your Honour.